Charlie Kirk's shocking assassination has America on edge, with whispers of a civil war louder than ever. Harvey Levin and Mark Geragos discuss how his assassination has fueled chaos, outrage, and fear that America is on the brink of a civil war. This is Two Angry Men.
Charlie Kirk, even though he had views that a lot of people disagreed with, he also was eager to discuss with people who disagreed with him. For somebody like that to be gunned down, I don't know, it's different. Welcome to the Two Angry Men podcast, Mark. I am not going to mince words. I fear a civil war. I have lived a long time, and I have seen a president assassinated. I have seen multiple attempts at killing presidents. I have seen civil rights leaders slain. I've seen presidential candidates slain. I have seen war. I have seen riots. But Charlie Kirk is different. This is not a politician. This is somebody who was slaughtered for his views and not pushing a particular, even political party. I think he had an ideology, and he was a young guy on college campuses. And I am feeling like people are at the point where they think this is the solution. And I am worried as much as I have been my entire life about democracy and America.
We discussed a number of episodes ago. You had a similar thought, and I forget what the kind of impetus was for it, and I did not agree with you. I do think this has a qualitative different feel to it. I don't know if that's because it was so shocking in real time to have watched it or closely. I don't know if it was because we've come so far in AI that I know I and a lot of people that I know at first, their first reaction was, is this real or is this AI? Which is kind of a distortion of reality that is really stunning. And then I think also there are, you start with Mangione and the idea that somebody can be assassinated for presumably under the government theory for a who they are in terms of being a healthcare professional, having a constituency, as you will. Charlie Kirk clearly has a constituency. I might push back a little bit on whether he's affiliated with one side or another, but I think
he is affiliated with one side. I'm just saying, yeah, I think right. he's a grassroots guy.
Yeah, and I think that clearly when you think of him, you automatically think of MAGA, or you associate Turning Points with, and the movement, the grass movement he started with, the MAGA movement. And I think also there is some, coming off of Butler and the president and the assassination attempt there, there is this feeling that this kind of cauldron that we're in that does have a kind of a frightening feel. I mean, you, like me, remember where you were when Kennedy was assassinated. I mean, for guys of our vintage, that is something that is seared into your memory. Yep. I remember standing in school and knowing exactly where I was. I can still
Me too. I mean, look, I was at the Ambassador Hotel the night Robert Kennedy was assassinated. I was working in his campaign. I was in high school, but I was ahead of the students there for Kennedy. And so I've seen a lot of this, and a lot of it has been shocking. Martin Luther King was shocking. Robert Kennedy was shocking. John Kennedy was shocking. There was a lot that was really alarming, but this feels like a flashpoint. It feels different. It feels like that in the past we've always talked about, this one lone lunatic who did, James Earl Ray with Martin Luther King, Lee Harvey Oswald with John Kennedy, Sirhan Sirhan. You look at John David Chapman, with John Lennon. they're all we push them aside as wackos and one-offs. And it's not feeling like a one-off anymore. We keep saying, yeah, it's this lunatic fringe, just they don't really matter, they don't really count, but it feels like they start to count and that it's not just these one-off lone crazy people.
So one of the things, against the framework of how did Epstein die? Was he killed or was it a suicide? And because there are so many questions about that, the Kennedy assassination, there's so many questions about that. There are so many questions swirling around this case already. You've seen the internet, you've seen the speculation. I've seen where the people who have theories that there was a hand signal. There are now all kinds of not just theories, but people who are taking the data points of the question that was being asked and then the subsequent shooting. And now there is a suspect who is in custody, presumably turned in by his relative. And then he does not fit kind of one or the other of the conspiracy theories. That's one of the things that's been buzzing around in my world today is that, I watched an interview by Patrick Bet-David, and Patrick Bet-David was going through and said, that he had 4 different theories. And I thought, he's a very smart man. And one of his theories is if there is another shooting attempt or assassination of somebody on the left who's identified with the progressives or the left, that to his point, it articulates yours, that seems like that would be orchestrated to cause a war, to cause some kind of to kind of ratchet up divisiveness.
There were words used after the assassination. They have woken us the fuck up. Them's fighting words. And
I don't disagree. I don't disagree. Like I said, I've come a long way since the episode where you talked about framing kind of what's happening in the country as a war. I understand that. The video of this was just so graphic, was so in your face, was so like I say, almost kind of breaking the wall of reality, in the sense that you said to yourself, is this AI or is this real? That has taken us to a level. And because Charlie had such strong opinions and had such a facile mind, that it really is, and because he would go into the proverbial lion's den, it has shocked a little people. I think you then take some of those man on the street interviews where people say good or it's fine or this or that. And I know TMZ's taken a lot of heat for supposed laughter, which, if you have, I think, adequately explained. But it is a flashpoint, I think. I don't disagree with you anymore.
Yeah, I think part of it is that Charlie Kirk, even though he had strong views that a lot of people not only disagreed with, but some found abhorrent, he also was one of those people that was just eager to discuss with people who disagreed with him. And, he did that with Bill Maher. He did that with Young Turks. He did that with a lot of people.
Gavin Newsom's podcast.
He did it with Gavin Newsom. And the idea was almost, let's test our views. And that is the essence of democracy. It's what Abraham Lincoln did in town squares many, many decades ago. And for somebody like that to be gunned down the way he was, when he is reaching out, he's doing what you're supposed to do in a democracy. I don't know, it's different. It's just different than a politician who has power, who, for whatever reason, somebody wants to stop the exercise of that power. This is different. And the fact that people are so up in arms right now, and you don't feel like anybody wants, you don't feel like There are people on both sides that do not want to tamp down. I mean, it used to be nobody would say, "Yeah, let's go to war." There are a lot of people who don't want to tamp this down right now on both sides.
So I come from a career of doing battle in court where you exchange, where you're diametrically opposed to somebody. Somebody's trying to literally kill my client, and I'm defending against that. I mean, kill in some cases literally. And but one of the things that I have said, and you've seen this many times over the years, some of the people I'm closest to in the world are people who I've gone through that battle with. I've gone through a hard fought trial where we wouldn't even speak until the end. And I may win, they may win, or whatever it is, but there is that kind of going through the trenches. And you have that ability at a certain point to go out of the courtroom after the battle and to at least there's a certain level of camaraderie, which is one of the things I always admired about him. I used to watch his videos. I watched the one, I think I told you this the other yesterday, that I watched the one the night before he was killed of a guy who was 5'3", and teasing him about not being 6'5". In fact, ironically, I was going to tease you about that. And I watched it because he did it with such good humor. He did it with such aplomb, and he did not mind. And I can appreciate this as somebody who goes against the grain often by defending periodically, the most unpopular or most hated people. But he did it and didn't mind it. It was one of the things that I always kind of admired about Pete Buttigieg, that he is not afraid to go to Fox News, for instance, and argue with people who have different viewpoints. Charlie Kirk relished the idea of going into tough situations and using his wit, using his intelligence. And there's something to be admired about that. And boy, if now we're going to kill people who do that, that's what I said.
That's what I'm saying. That makes it different. And I will say it has been. I want to get into two things. There is. I don't even want to call it a conspiracy theory, but there's something that is unanswered and really bothering me that I want to get into in a minute. But I will say that it really struck me today to hear all the people in Congress talking about, their kids telling them last night, "You can't run again. I don't want you to die. We're canceling town halls because they're just too dangerous. How are you going to do political rallies next year during this election?" I mean, there were so many, the fallout of this where, I remember when Gabby Gifford was shot and, she was out, I believe, in a parking lot in Arizona, and she was shot along with others. And there was a kind of momentary, nationwide fear among politicians, but it kind of subsided. But with everything ramping up the way it has, with what happened in Minnesota, and just all of the shootings, and then this, I think an alarm has gone off with politicians. And I wonder how many people are not going to run for re-election next year. I think a lot. I think a lot. It's not worth it. It's not worth it.
I hadn't thought about the repercussion for politicians. I think that the stunning thing to me is just somebody who is having an unpleasant conversation for you or for the audience. Okay. And when I say unpleasant conversation, you have, as you kind of, I think, brilliantly observed, we have a rich history in America of debating, of getting into it. I mean, that whether it's the founding fathers who had a robust discussion over a period of time and through a constitutional convention, whether it is the Douglas Lincoln debates, whether it is
Kennedy Nixon,
whether it is Harris and Trump, I mean, whether it's Biden and Trump, debates and discourse and the idea of an exchange of ideas, the kind of the food fights on cable news, that were prevalent in the 90s and the 2000s to some degree. I remember being in some of the prosecution versus defense food fights, which I've done for years myself. The idea that getting into a discourse or getting angry at somebody that you're arguing with to the point where you take their life, and seemingly it's not, I mean, it's never an excuse, but there is some comfort sometimes. Comfort is probably the worst word in the world, but when there is an extreme mental health issue, and which I've dealt with on countless murder cases, at least there's a way that you can kind of analyze it and rationalize it and put it into a category where you can wake up in the morning and go about your business. I think what you're talking about is that this is, you cross the Rubicon where it becomes very difficult to get out of bed and do what you need to do for the fear that you can be shot down literally for an exchange of ideas.
Yeah. I want to go over something with you that I'm having trouble kind of piecing together. So, when the authorities held a news conference saying that they had captured this guy, um, they said that Tyler Robinson had a roommate and that Tyler Robinson, in some way, shape, or form, and they said that he used Discord. Discord told us it wasn't on their platform, but in some way communicated to the roommate that after the shooting, that the gun was in a towel in the bushes and it needed to be retrieved. Now, the roommate showed the authorities this note, however, whatever form it took. And they say that right now they are not looking at any other people who might be involved in this. There's nobody they have in their sights, but the investigation continues. But what is when he the note seems to be saying, get that gun. And when you say get that gun, what are the coordinates? It's wrapped in a towel in the bushes. Well, in fact, it was wrapped in a towel in bushes. That's all true. But when you just say bushes in Utah, it could be anywhere. So it's almost like he must have said something to someone before. If the note is as vague as it's in the bushes, that someone would know which bush to look at because it was accurate where this was, hidden. And I'm having trouble with this because we contacted the authorities and they said there's no one else we're looking at. As far as we're concerned right now, it's a single person who committed this act. But this has been troubling me.
And I don't understand. And by the way, this is based on, I can't tell you how many murder cases that I've handled. I do not understand this idea of closing down initially any potential investigation by saying we're not looking. I mean, if it's
Well, they said presently. They're just saying right now. Yeah.
But why would you ever say that?
I don't know. I agree with you.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
I agree with you.
It makes zero sense. Also, the other thing is, it seems peculiar based on the video of the timing of the shots. If it was somebody who was 200 yards away, who presumably cannot hear the exact questioning at the time, unless it's amplified sound that carries, and that's certainly a possibility. But the idea that you would shut that down based on a note, based on the language that was being uttered by the speaker, and the shot, which required, and I also had this argument this morning already, somebody telling me, no, that's not
I feel the same way as you. Very rarely do you see somebody fire a single shot, and especially at that range. And yet he fired one shot and left. And that feels much more professional than amateur to me.
I you're hard pressed to believe that that is such an easy shot for somebody who is not at some level trained.
Yes.
Number one, right?
And confident enough after the first shot. And speaking of shots, um, you mentioned Luigi Mangione, who had left an engraving on one of the cartridges, one of the bullets, and you look at what this guy did, and it said, "Hey, fascist, catch," and there were several others. That it used to be manifestos that people left and diaries, and now it's what you write on a bullet cartridge. And you just think about that, and it's chilling. It's almost, here's my slogan for what I'm doing, and that's enough. It's this whole thing
I
now
was
that we're going to
wondering
put
if,
our reasoning on the bullet that kills the person.
and that, as you say, is chilling. I didn't know, and obviously I don't know. I don't have any inside information into the investigation other than what is being reported. So I caution, but if there was that and other insignias or signatures or inscriptions, th- that also lends credence to the idea that it was not just a single solo one-off person.
Well, I'm not sure I agree with that because look, Luigi was a lone person and he had inscriptions on the bullets. There were 3 bullets they found with cartridges that had inscriptions, and basically all the same. But it could be a lone person doing that. Um, I'm just having trouble with these notes that were left for the roommate. That it just feels like if he's being if he's asking for somebody to get the gun and get rid of it, it's not good enough just to say it's in a bush. There had to be a discussion beforehand, right?
So yes,
And
and
I don't know with who, and there's no evidence the roommate's involved in this. I want to make that really
correct.
clear.
And
But
I, but
somebody, you don't say it's in a bush if you want him to pick it up and nobody knows where the bush is.
by the way, there's also, it's not one of these situations where somebody goes into this thinking this is my last act. You know, this is a planned, at least seemingly very well planned, very timed perfectly for the message that they want sent, an escape route, a plan for what they were going to do with the evidence afterwards. I mean, a lot of times prosecutors traffic in this idea of how sophisticated it is. You can, the argument that I've been having this morning, argument's probably too strong, but the discussion I've been having is, well, this isn't that sophisticated. And I think it's fairly well sophisticated. I think it's a fairly intricate plan.
But
Well,
what's weird about that though? You say it's intricate. He had apparently gone to the school to get the lay of the land before he did what he did, and he was wearing certain clothes when he did that, and then he was wearing the clothes you see in the various surveillance videos that have been released. Um, you know when he actually allegedly fired the shot. He seemed to have gone home, changed out of the clothes he was wearing during the shooting, but put the other clothes back on when he had gone to the campus, knowing that there were surveillance cameras on campus. He had to know that. So if he was that sophisticated, why would he be wearing something that got captured on surveillance video? That doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
unless he thought that I'm going to change into the clothes. I'm already on the surveillance video. When they take me into custody, they're going to test those clothes. There's no gunshot residue on those clothes. And therefore, they'll realize that I was a person of interest and catch and release.
Well,
So
that's pretty weak because you're just connecting the dots with those clothes. It's not like it's the smoking gun, but you can see it's the same person who is scoping out the place as the person who fired the shot. And even though they're wearing different clothes, you can still see other features that connect the two. And if he's wearing he was wearing in that first video, it's pretty damning right there.
well, given the state of the art now on facial recognition, and this appears to be somebody who had some depth of knowledge on in these areas, the facial recognition would be something that I think they would be more concerned with.
I have a question for you. So he supposedly confessed to his father,
Right.
but then would not agree to turn himself in. So his father told a youth minister, and the youth minister then called the police. If this thing ends up going to trial, is there such a thing as the parishioner priest privilege where he could say, you can't, well, I suppose the father could still
It
testify.
breaks, right,
Does it break because of the father?
breaks because of the father would be the argument that the prosecutor would make. Prosecutor would say, once he told his father, famously, there is no parent-child privilege. There's spousal privilege, a horizontal.
Is that gone in every state, the parent?
Almost every state. Yeah.
I don't know about Utah, but
It's an interesting question.
I don't know whether he doesn't have a whole lot to raise, but what Mark and I are talking about, just so everybody knows, there used to be a privilege within families that has kind of gone by the wayside. So, the theory would be that what the kid says to his dad is privileged, and then what the dad says to the youth minister is part of the parishioner priest privilege, and therefore the confession can't be used. I mean, that would be the argument.
That if there was still, or if
Right.
an existing privilege, you could make that argument. A murder case provides, a cynic would say a murder case provides a lot of probable cause to break that chain.
I thought about Brian Koberger when I heard the prosecutors were asking for the death penalty. And there were some people in my office who were saying, do you think this thing is going to plea bargain where he agrees to life without parole and in return they don't go to trial? I don't see it in this case because, the president on down, they've called for the death penalty. The governor has said it. And, the prosecutor in Koberger took a lot of heat for plea bargaining that case. And I just do not see a plea bargain in this one. Do you?
No, and I also would not be surprised if you see federal and state tandem.
Oh, yeah. Which goes first?
That's always a kind of a struggle, if you will. If you're the defense lawyer, the first thing you're doing is you're looking at the individual state constitution. Is there a clause? We saw it in New York with Paul Manafort. I had it back in the day with the case called the Japanese OJ case in California, where if you were tried federally and acquitted, that was a bar, double jeopardy, and it did not work in reverse. And so they probably, a defense lawyer would look at that on the off chance that they think that there's some way to engineer something in terms of one prosecution going before the other.
So what do you think is going to happen next year in the elections with this kind of backdrop?
I will tell you, against this backdrop, I'll circle back to, I hope that whatever door number 4 of the Patrick Bet-David kind of going through the possibilities does not happen. I hope it does not spawn another killing. I hope it does not escalate, as it's truly it's a bridge too far. I mean, any killing is a bridge too far, but a killing that is presumably based on discourse you don't like, and the reaction of that kind of overreaction to that, of quelling all discourse based on that, is also an overreaction. So what I think you're right in the sense that, given where we are, I can see a lot of people saying it's just not worth it. I'm not getting into the arena. This battle isn't worth it anymore. I can see that. And that's horrible, because in our political system right now, what you want is more voices, more robust voices, that are kind of courteous at some level.
So my final thought, and it's not good, but I'm
What
gonna
is
but I'm gonna say it. It's not good, but I'm gonna say it. So if there is a retaliation, say, on the right to somebody on the left, um, I think it's on, because when you look at what's happened with school shootings, I mean, I remember the first shooting. I believe his name was Charles Whitman in 1964, I believe, at the University of Texas, where he got up in the bell tower. And it was so shocking, but it was such a one-off. And then you have, many years later, I believe 1990 was Columbine. And, that's almost 3 decades ago. And it seemed shocking, just as University of Texas was. But then it was followed by another and another and another. And it's a way that people on the fringes expressed their animosity. And it's become almost a weekly thing in this country. So, as much as it's abhorrent to see each time we see it, it's not shocking the way it used to be shocking, because it happens so much. And it's almost this is America. And that's what we're saying about these, school shootings and office shootings and grocery store shootings and everything else, that this is America. If this happens where it's a tit for a tat, and you see 1 and 2, and then you see 3 and 4, it's going to feel like the same sort of thing. And I am really worried we're right on the edge of that happening.
Well, I I have friends who used to go around to do college tours, college speaking tours. And then, because their opinions were not so-called popular, they were banished and didn't anymore. And I would hate to think that that's where we're at this point, and that we get to a tit for tat.
I'd hate to think it too. I'm just saying, it's one of the things about getting old, that it helps you connect dots. And I'm just not
So
liking what I'm seeing.
I don't disagree with you. I don't want to be a negative Nelly, but I don't disagree with you. And like I said, 8 episodes ago, or podcast episodes ago, I did not. I reacted strongly against your negativity, but this definitely has a different feel to it.
It does. Okay, my friend, take care.
Take care. Thanks, Harvey.